My name is Danielle Enblom, and I first of all have to thank the Flurry. Jonathan asked me this year. I've taught Irish dance workshops at the Flurry the last couple of years, and Jonathan asked if I would help bring together some more step dancers and related traditions into the programming this year, and it has been such a blast and so much fun. Evie, would you be up for starting us off and just telling us a little bit about how you know a couple of the artists in this panel?
Sure. I'm not spotlighted right now. There I am. Hi. Well, Phil Jamison I've known since I was very little, as a tiny junior green grass clogger. And I love, like, on the other side of the spectrum, I've known Nic since he was that age, since he was a little guy, dancing with when I was with Rhythm and Shoes. And then there's a variety of folks here that I know, but Sophie and I were at the International Body Music Festival, which is one of my projects, when it was in Paris, and that's where Sophie's not up here right now, but she's here somewhere. Spanning the spectrum. Laurel and I have played concerts together, just all kinds of relationships, and I wish we were all in the same room together.
Pierre, will you tell us about some of the folks that you know in this panel and how you know them?
Yes. So by screen, I will start by the upper left side. It's Nic, my good friend Nic. So we met in the U.S., in Ireland, and always a great pleasure. And oh, Jane Peck and Marie. No, in fact, and Marie taught to Jane
Yes.
25 years ago,
Yes.
30 years ago. I know Liam
In
because
France.
he made some project with some Quebecois dancer. Uh, I know Catherine Turocy by reputation, and I saw her dancing in Montreal in around 80, so doing the Lambranzuni,
Show.
show
That was
around.
a while ago in the 80s.
Mm.
Yeah.
I know Phil because his fabulous book, very, very good. And sometimes we share some information. And we did, in fact, one workshop in the West Coast in 92, 3, you know. Kieran, I know Kieran very much. We danced, we did some tours together. And I know you. And I want to say, I don't. Sophie. She went in my house. She met the whole the family, and really a good person. I hope I don't forget. But I want to say that I'm very happy to meet virtually my far cousin because we never met Yvonne Chartrand. You know Yvonne Chartrand, because everybody I'm doing some meeting even in Montreal each year, and people say, "Hey, your name is Pierre Chartrand. Do you know Yvonne?" And some people say, "I learned the Métis dancing by Yvonne." We never met, but the Chartrand is a very common Métis name, so I'm very happy, and I hope Yvonne that at some point we will be able to meet really. So thank you
Yvonne,
for that good idea, Danielle.
Yvonne and Pierre, you are our two Canadian dancers. So why don't we start off just talking a teeny bit about the Canadian dance, and Jane, I'm going to add you to the spotlight because Jane has done quite a bit of research on Dance in Canada as well, and I know Jane knows Anne Marie and Pierre very well. So Yvonne, would you start off by telling us about what Métis dance is?
Sure. Métis is a French word that means mixed, and my father never heard that word until he went to school, and he grew up in Saint Laurent, Manitoba. So Métis, you can have French, you can have a European and First Nations ancestry. So these two cultures mixed and blended to create a brand new, unique nation. And usually everybody who is Michif or Métis, they belong to a community. So it's a very distinct culture. So the umbrella term that for Aboriginal, there's First Nations, there's Métis, and there's Inuit. So the Métis are it's like a brand new nation, like a lot of people talk about that as well. And so there's a lot of diversity across Canada within the Métis culture. Because the European can be French, can be Scottish, can be Irish, can be English and Scandinavian. And of course, the First Nations too, there can be different, like Cree, Soto, Dene, Anishinaabe, Blackfoot. And so across Canada, I've been honored to be able to be with lots of different Métis communities and travel and do workshops and learn from different elders in different communities and different knowledge keepers. Some of them are not elders, they're younger. And so the dance styles of the Michif or Métis, they vary as well. So I always like to acknowledge my elders and my knowledge keepers. So there's like a traditional style, like from long ago, where a lot of the steps sound like a horse. And John Arkand, who's also the master of the Métis fiddle, he had the Canadian traditional Red River Jigging Championships over at his ranch just outside of Saskatoon, at Windy Acres Ranch. And so for many, many years, he had these competitions, and he brought in these elders and these knowledge keepers who were really, really good at doing these traditional style steps. And the thing about it was, like, for the national dance for the Red River Jig, our people used to do about 100 steps in a row, and they were just single steps. And so, you know, because we went through our dark stages and everything, so, you know, a lot of those steps have been lost, and we're trying to reclaim them. Yeah, so it's been you know, wonderful to work with John and different elders, Maria Campbell, Kathleen Steinhauer, Gilbert Anderson, Jean Pelche, who are just some prominent Métis elders who have, you know, been working with the traditional dance style and really bringing that back. And of course, all the young people are innovating, and somehow we went from long traditional outfits with moccasins and kiskatas and cummerbunds, and then so of course we love to square dance, and we have so many dances, and so now a lot of the young people are wearing square dancers, and we wear these clickers. It's two shoes, it's not a tap shoe, but it's like a tap shoe, but it's got two pieces of metal that click together. So there's a lot of really lots of innovation with this style. And so I distinguish it by saying traditional Métis and contemporary style of Métis dance.
Thank you, Yvonne. We are so honored to have you here, and so grateful to have Métis dancing incorporated and included at the Flurry Festival. And I'd like to add to all of the artists, even if you're not spotlighted, feel free to interject if you ever hear anything that feels relevant that you'd like to ask or add to. This is for the artists, for folks
could I ask
joining.
a question about the innovations?
So, Bill, yes, please do.
Just a quick question. When I see like YouTube videos of that style of dance, what I see from here in North Carolina is lots, to my eyes, are a lot of influence of modern clogging style. And the taps you refer to, we call jingle taps, are very, very common around here. So I'm just really wondering if the changes that you're seeing with the younger generation, are they and I saw one video of a kid playing Orange Blossom Special on the fiddle, you know, so you know, they were dancing to that. So I'm kind of curious about how much of the tradition is being influenced by modern clogging from the States.
Yeah, I think there's just you know, a lot of influences, like from tap, from all over the place. And I did see the clogging with I didn't know what it was called down south, but I have seen some of the dance styles. I don't really know how I think people just, like, you know, somehow they got these shoes, these clickers, and they just started playing around. There's a lot of tap influence. I know there's a lot of tap dancers, young dancers that are also into tap. And I think, you know, we're just really super creative. And, you know, like, even like there was like an English step. Like, I studied some of the European style dance steps, and I saw, you know, some of that, like, you know, when you do your leg in circle and stuff like that. Like, that's kind of, I noticed that was from a European style. I mean, English step. So yeah, I think it just comes from a lot, from all over, you know, Yeah, and now that there's the internet and that access to seeing different styles of dance, I think a lot of is borrowed for sure, just from watching, a lot of different step dancing. So I can't say for sure, but it is definitely possible, that somebody saw some of your dances and just went, wow, that's really cool. I'm going to try that. Yeah.
Great. Well, now while we're here, I want to come back in just a moment to talk to Jane a little bit about some of the Minnesota connections and then go to Baroque dance. But while we're all here, there's Phil and or I think Phil and Pierre both told me a story about a conversation you had years ago, back in the 40s, right? No, just kidding. I said something about Pierre in the 70s the other day, and I thought I'd offended him, but I didn't. He was researching in the 70s. Okay. Anyways, but a number of years ago, about a word that you use in French Canadian square dancing, and you asked Phil about it. Pierre, what was that?
Yes, it was the question about domino. So I won't go too deeper in that question because since 2 years, but just to say, Phil and some other people in US said, oh yeah, you have some Catholic background and Dominus Vobiscum, but it's true, just to put the research in from a wide view, that maybe not the Quebecois color. We always finish a dance saying domino, tout le monde est chaud, or domino, les hommes ont chaud, domino, les femmes ont chaud. So the word domino come from where? So it's a question that qui m'obsède depuis de longues années. Obsède. Well, you understand? Obsède? Oui. And so just to say that in 19th century, from the 18th, 19th century, the domino is the mask for bal masque, le bal masqué. The domino in 19th century, people going to opera, and we have some theater piece in New York, Boston, 19th century. The domino could be a cape to go at the bal masqué, could be to go at the bal masqué. So the domino is very, 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 very relate to dance. So why we say that? I don't know. Phil and another person, I say Phil because I see him. I had two sources, one from Phil, from a band from Texas in the 40s, saying at the end they play music and they finish and they say domino. But it's not a call, they just finish. So it could be many things. It could be just a fashion maybe in 30s, 40s that they kept in the margin of the big, like New England. So we are the same margin in Quebec that maybe Texas and South Carolina are. So why we keep that, I don't know, but I won't push too much. You asked me a question that in fact I cannot answer. I'm just doing a research. But by the way, if never you heard, I took the occasion, domino for not the pizza, but if you heard about domino related to dance, send me an email. Okay? And that's it.
The callers that I heard do it back in the 70s were in the Adirondacks in New York State, and there's a lot of French Canadian folks who lived there, and they would end their dances with domino.
Sure.
And Bob Wills in Texas, several of his recordings end with domino, kind of just say it's the end. And somebody, I don't recall if it was you or somebody else was saying it, sort of mocking what they say at the end of a Catholic church service. Is that what they say, a domino or something? Sort of as a parody of the end of a Catholic service. Is that possible?
No, that's the people say is Dominus Vobiscum. That's the Latin. We learned Dominus Vobiscum. But I think it's really more related because we have 2 centuries of use of domino for the dance, le bal masqué. But I will publish on that. Catherine? Do you have
I was just saying that there is, and you're right, it's at the end of the blessing of the Catholic Mass, and it is in Latin. And it could be the end of a blessing for the people, just saying, go with God or go in with His blessing. And that would make sense to me, but I could look into that.
Mm. I was a brother of at the Masses when I was young.
Yes.
So I know that is at the end of the
Laurel and Evie, have you heard that in square dances, playing for square dances? Have you ever heard anything like that?
I don't know. It
Domino?
sounds so familiar, but I don't think that's made its way there yet. I love the discussion though. I'm just eating this up. Thank you guys so much for speaking about this. Yeah.
Yeah, it was
Great.
okay.
Okay. All right. So let's head back to Canada for just a moment. So we'll Pierre, Yvonne, and then we'll go to Jane, and then we'll get to Ireland and more about the US and Scotland and France in a moment. But Pierre and Yvonne and Jane as well. In the Canadian, and Sophie, you could even chime in here actually too. Maybe I better add Sophie in a moment because she's got dance steps. We're all related, but she's got steps related to Canadian steps as well. But what are the similarities between French Canadian jigging and Métis jigging?
Yvonne make a very good presentation. Let's see, Center and West Canada. I will say on the east side of Canada, Quebec, Maritimes, and Cape Breton. It's very interesting how it's close, and I won't take too much time, but just repeat that we often speak about regional difference, but I think the generational difference are also very important. And just to say, like I said yesterday in my workshop, if you read Frank Rod's dance step description in the traditional dancing of Scotland by Tom Follett, when you read what he wrote in 1957, when I wrote that many years ago, I say, oh, he's just writing the Saguenay step area. Because the step dancing he wrote in the 50s for Cape Breton was not what we named the modern Cape Breton with the ankles and all that. It was quite close to the Saguenay. So when I think the more we go back, more maybe it's similar or it's close. So just to see the old dancer in Quebec have a quite relate or similar step than like the old, very old Cape Breton dancer. In fact, one time in Toronto, I was there for the Harbourfront Folk Festival, and the Cape Bretoner fiddler came and asked me, he said, are you from Cape Breton? And I started to speak. So, he's not from Cape Breton. But he said, oh, I like your dancing. The remake, it was an old one. It was in the around 1992. And he said, it remember me, the old step dancer he saw when he was young. So I was old before, when I was young. No, it's not what I want to say. So just to say that the East style is maybe quite related. We have the same thing on, if you take the east side of Newfoundland, and when we name the French coast, Émile Benoit, these people have also a very related style. And not to belong, just to speak about the 3-2, because Yvonne, she spoke about the Métis, you know, the Red River Jig. It's a, almost the national anthem, if I can see, very popular. And it's very, very close to La Grande Gigue Simple. And when I was young, the people, like Jean Carignan was playing for me, and he was not asking on which tune I want to dance. He just said, oh, you want to dance? And he was starting La Grande Gigue Simple. The 3-2, it's a tune just for that. So it's very specific to French Canadian and also Métis, because by the Red River Jig, who is almost the same with many, many versions, like in Quebec.
Yvonne or Jane, do you have anything you'd like to add?
They feel very close to me. They feel very similar to me. But I found it interesting last night that Pierre, in his session, talked about his research on discovering the doublé through the heel, which then sort of sets your weight back. And setting that weight back feels more related to Métis. And he talked about that being maybe an older form of French-Canadian jigging. And that starts to feel a little more close, whereas I was always taught the weight forward for French-Canadian. And that feels further from Métis dancing. So I think that's really interesting, Pierre. And
can I throw in just here in this conversation, because when you talk about the influences and similarities and differences, we know like there's so much crossbreeding and all of that. But the thing that I find most fascinating is weight. is your center of gravity, how you hold your body, and that's very culturally based. And that seems to really shift depending on where you are. Even as we steal steps from everywhere, your center of gravity seems to be more connected to the history and the style. Kind of curious about that.
Absolutely. Yvonne, would you speak to that? And undoubtedly you are part French, I would imagine.
Yes, I have lots of different ancestries in my ancestry, and my father always says, you're not part this and you're not part that, you're Métis. And what I can say is that the Le Grand Jig Simple is a big influence, you know, from the French for the Red River Jig. Is one story that I've heard. Nobody really knows how the Red River Jig music was created. But one really, really prominent thing is that the Red River Jig is known as crooked music. And so the European music is always on a 4/4 beat, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, I believe, you know, maybe not all the songs, but so every fiddler will play the Red River Jig differently. So sometimes you would change your step on your right foot, sometimes on your left foot. It depends when the fiddler changes. You could have 10 different fiddlers and they're all going to play the Red River Jig differently. And even each fiddler, when they play the Red River Jig, every time they play the Red River Jig, it's going to be different. So there's little notes here. It could be like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. And so to me, that is like the biggest distinction is in the music. And then of course you just step with the fiddler. So you never know what you're gonna get. It's like a bug.
Are the differences actually in the meter, or is it just in the syncopation, the interpretation of the meter?
I don't know how to answer
meter.
that
I think
question.
meter and melody. Yeah.
I was just
It's just
gonna
the way
add
they
a
play
little
it.
something to
Yeah,
that.
they just throw a note in there, and I don't know how to say, I don't know that language, but yeah, it's known as crooked music, and so it's just every fiddler will play it like slightly differently. Sorry, I don't know. Go ahead.
So I was just going to add a little something, just that after many years of first, I should preface this first that I don't specialize in Métis dance. That is not my specialty. But in trying to bring that into our shows to our populations down here in the States, I had to do some training of fiddlers and dancers, of course, and it was so hard for them to adjust to the idea of a crooked tune. And yes, it is actually in the the actual timing changes, so that I got to a point where I had to say to them, okay, so the first part, we've got the chorus and then we've got the jig, and one is 19 and a half measures, and the other is like 11 and a quarter measures. Okay, so I mean, it's just, that's the crookedness, is that it's not 16 or 32,
Thanks, Jane. And I see Pierre with his finger up. And then in just a moment, I've brought Liam back up, and Catherine, we know you're still out there. You're coming back in a moment. And Pierre, after Pierre speaks, I'd love to hear from our musicians, Phil, Evie, Laurel, a little bit about in terms of being old time musicians, how you might relate to the crookedness in the Canadian tunes versus the straightness in the Irish and Scottish tunes. And then we'll head over to Europe with Baroque and Scotland and Ireland. Go ahead, Pierre.
Okay, it's very interesting what said Yvonne, because it's what I live, what I see in the 80s when I was dancing, like with Pitou Boudreau. Louis Pitou Boudreau, maybe you heard about him, a famous musician. He was never playing the same Grand Jig Sing. The length was changing every time. And after another Carignan was playing another Grand Jig Sing. So for us, we just have an always crooked, always changing. But it's true that after with the record, we know now if I go in the session, everybody play often like one standard grand jig simple because they learn from one shot of Louis Puteaux-Boudreau and say that's the Louis Puteaux version. It's sure the recording music fix that, but dancing with a lot of old musicians, 70s, 80s, it was always changing, like you said, Yvonne. And maybe just to say that the 3-2, no, that rhythm, it seems more and more by research that it comes from England. Maybe you heard about Jean Duval, who did his PhD on ethnomusicology in Quebec, and he relate, like I relate the basic step, the step I show yesterday in my step dancing class, to the Ren step, and he relate the 3-2 also for the old 18th century on pipe in 3-2. Right? So everything is mix, remix, demix, and that's life. In one century, we were all just one great people.
Thank you, Pierre. So Phil, Evie, Laurel, I see you nodding your heads a lot as musicians in this conversation. What do you have to add to this as old-time musicians who relate to
I could say something here. That in the Southern old-time tradition, there are lots of crooked tunes. And as a dancer, sometimes those are the most fun to dance to. If you're in on the joke, if you know where that extra beat is, they're really fun to dance to. They're not designed for a set dance that is phrased to the music, obviously, like a lot of the European set dances. So a lot of the 32 bar, 2A, 2B tunes, were designed for those set dances where you had to have that phrasing. But if you're just freestyle flat footing, it's a lot of fun to dance to the crooked tunes. And we also have a lot of tunes that have short repetitive phrases, that don't time out with 8s and 16s. And some people think that those reflect the African American influence on our dance traditions, our music traditions, that those do not come from the European tradition. So those are just a few comments. But I'll say one other thing before I pass the mic on. Something that's fascinated me in recent years is this whole idea of the underlying rhythm of different step dance styles. And as an example, when I first learned banjo, I was taught that the rhythm was bum diddy. You banjo players out there, right, Evie? So we all learned bum diddy, and the rhythm is bum da da dum da da dum da da, which is really heavy on the downbeat. And years later, I realized, no, in Southern dance music, the rhythm is diddy bum, diddy bum, diddy bum, diddy bum, diddy bum, and the emphasis is more on the upbeat. And it's really interesting if you listen to different styles of fiddle music, to just say, is this bum diddy or diddy bum? And watch what the dancers do with their feet. If they step on the beat, it's a bum diddy. Like St. Anne's Reel, dum da da dum buddy bum diddy, something like that. And watch how people clap their hands if they clap on the beat or on the off, which feels more comfortable. And I feel that music emphasis really influences our stepping. So when we do shuffle steps, we do shuffle step, diddy bum, rather than step, shuffle, step, shuffle. So just some things I've been thinking about. I'll pass the mic.
But when you're talking about that, the where the downbeat and offbeat are doesn't change. It's just where you feel the emphasis, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, and if you watch, there's certain I could pick a dancer like Thomas Malpin from Tennessee. He'll sometimes clap when he dances. He's always clapping on the upbeat, because that is what he's hearing. That's the emphasis. And which is so different than when you hear the heavy bum diddy and clapping on the beat.
I'll just throw in there, I think one of the, it's wonderful we have access to everything now through the internet, but it does make people want to define how things go. And the beautiful thing about tradition is how much it changes, and especially with that individual flavor, which may or may not be regional. But when I lived in Bloomington, Indiana, my neighbor was an old-time fiddler, and it took me a little while of playing tunes with him to realize he had a way of making every tune crooked. So even tunes that were normally straight, he had this thing he did, which I called like his thinking moment, like where he was always adding another couple beats, but it was generally in the same place. And once I caught a hold of that, I could play anything with him. I could follow him because knew where he was going to make it crooked.
So Evie, did he play with other, I mean, let me pose you this question, because I find that, you know, back in the day when the fiddle was the dance instrument, we didn't have a lot of backup instruments. The fiddler could be totally crooked and you didn't have to do it. But if you're playing with other musicians, you have to square it up so they know when to make the changes. So this guy, do other people just put up with him?
Yeah, I think everybody was just following him, just following wherever he went. And just in terms of when I'm teaching banjo tunes, often I don't realize they're crooked until I start like actually defining it for people, because I'm just following the melody. And same thing as a dancer. You know, Nic talks about this all the time. He did a workshop on this earlier. I'm listening more to the melody. And so if I'm following the melody, I'm not actually thinking about phrasing, but that's in freestyling, you know, that's in doing whatever I want.
Yeah, I think we think on the reverse way. I think generally dance music are crooked, Renaissance, Baroque, French Canadian, South, and the exception is square. And just to say, like all people close to Quebec City, in many places in Quebec, they dance on crooked tune. They don't know they are crooked. And if a modern fiddler arrives with a square tune, they feel very uncomfortable. They don't know why, but because they miss some extra beat or less beat. So the crooked or uncrooked, like I said, Evie, you know, they follow the tune since 40 years. They don't know if it's crooked or not. They just dance on the tune, c'est ça? So we think maybe a little in the reverse. That's
Thanks,
all.
Pierre. Thanks, Pierre. And now I thought we were going to head over to France, but I think we're going to head over to France in a moment. I think I want to go to Ireland really quickly and continue this conversation. Liam and Kieran specifically, and anyone else who has something to add. Liam, talking about Evie, you made the point that we in this digital world, we tend to think maybe things are becoming more standardized. And Liam, I think Sean-nós is a great opportunity to talk about what you mentioned in your class earlier, that there are all sorts of ways to dance in your style.
Yeah, all sorts of ways, all sorts of excuses for doing things you can't do or not being able to do certain things. Yeah, yeah. For me, Sean-nós it's kind of as opposed to a style, it's kind of a personal way of dancing. And the difference would be with say other styles of dancing would be, Kieran might be able to add a bit more here, but would be transmission maybe. That for me, Sean-nós is you learn it from observing and watching other people and dancing with others, and rather than it being broken down and learning any correct or particular routine, you pick it up. So it's kind of what you feel in the music. So it kind of ties in what you were talking about there with listening to the music and the upbeat and the offbeat and the syncopation. A lot of it is to do with how you hear the music and the accent in the music, and you're kind of backing the tune yourself with your rhythms. I know with a lot of step dancing here, it'd be good practice to duplicate what you dance on one foot on the second foot, but the freedom I think that for me Sean-nós allows is that you stick with your stronger foot, and then you kind of drop the weaker foot if you want to do something else with it, kind of make it up. It never turns out the same way twice, which is good for some things, but not great for everything.
I'll just jump in, and there's a great saying for Sean-nós dance that it's caught and not taught. So probably a lot of you have heard that, but it has to be experienced and it's felt. And as a teacher, that makes it challenging because we're trying to teach something without making it too specific or too exact. It's not an exact science. It has to be felt and experienced.
Caught, not taught. I love that. Also, are there elements that you have learned that you feel are very important to make sure you include when you dance?
Kieran, would you like to start?
My thoughts are kind of all over the place. Because I want to briefly touch on old style step dancing also, because my workshops are focused on that tomorrow. But one thing that I just love that I hear coming up from everybody is the importance of lineage. And, you know, I think it's really fascinating because lineage doesn't necessarily have to do with where you come from. Your influences in dance could be so deep and so part of you, but maybe not necessarily tied to your home place, your sense of place. And then on the other hand, maybe they're deeply rooted in your sense of place. But I think it's worth pointing out that in this time when we're all like globally together on Zoom, for all the students, I see we've got 115 participants here. So for the students who are absorbing, able to take so many classes right now and absorb so much dance, this is part of their lineage, who they're studying with now. And it's going to make the world a different place, you know, in the future going ahead. And I want to talk about in the old style step dance tradition, Irish step dance, we talk about it coming from the dance masters of the 18th and 19th century. And those guys were itinerant, you know, they were travelers, and they went to the continent, they went to France, and they went to Italy, and they went to Scotland, and they went to England, and brought different trends in dance back to Ireland. So, you know, that lineage is like very diverse as well, very spread out. And so like we get very specific about like, this is the Cork style of step dancing, or like with Sean-nós, this is the Connemara style. But I don't know, it really comes from a lot of different influences.
It does. Yeah. Thanks for saying that, Kieran. And I will note a couple of the artists who were invited but weren't able to be here. One is Michael Love, who will be teaching an embodied tap and the Shim Sham Shimmy interactive presentation later on. He and I did a podcast interview way before the revolution ever started here in Minneapolis, a long time ago, which will air someday. And we talked a lot about that lineage. And I know I've had conversations with a lot of you about this, and the way he put it was citing your sources when you're learning about something that comes from places. And Sophie, I know you and I had a little conversation about this recently too. You know, like we all come from either very defined cultural backgrounds or not. And we all are representative of everyone we've learned from. And it's okay to be that, as long as we're giving credit to where it's come from. And Sophie, is that something that you might be up for speaking to a little bit?
Hi, Danielle. First of all, it's so lovely to be here in this room with all these people, and particularly all these dancers who I've met many of them in all sorts of corners of the world, and small pubs and village halls and ceilidhs in people's homes. So just to all be together, it's amazing. So thanks, Danielle, for bringing us together, and it's just so wonderful. So thank you for that. Yeah, I was thinking, yeah, what you're saying about the tradition is interesting as well. What Liam was saying about the Sean-nós tradition, and for instance, doing it, tending to lean more on one foot and not needing that symmetry. It's all about the rhythms and the groove and and following in the tune. You know, it'll never come out twice the same way. And it's interesting because I guess in the Cape Breton tradition that I learned, it's very much, you know, you do it in one foot and then you do it in the other, and you maybe do the step 4 times. And I think I kind of gravitated away from that and started more looking for groove and also looking to maybe follow the tune and just kind of improvising more in my steps. And actually, since I've been doing more teaching, especially recently on Zoom and online teaching, and I guess when you teach, you've kind of got a responsibility to how you're teaching. It's different when you're dancing. If I get up and dance in a pub, I'll dance however I want to in a pub. Those were the days. But you know, or on stage or whatever. but yeah. Yeah, I think when you've kind of got a different, so I tend to, when I'm teaching, I tend to revert back to steps that I've learned. So I'd say, oh, this is a step that I picked up from Margie Beaton, or this is a step that I maybe sometimes even, it might even not be in person. It might be, oh, I saw somebody doing this on YouTube, or this is what I got from Frank McConnell, or I learned this one from Harvey Beaton. So, and occasionally I might, you know, throw in a step that I might have picked up in PI, like an Acadian step or something, but always acknowledging where I got the step from. And the other thing I was thinking as well, just recently, that's kind of I think I've moved back to looking for that symmetry in the dance. I guess through various things I've been reading that have influenced me, but also I think there's something very visually pleasing about that repetition of having that symmetry. And also the other thing that kind of just clicked just recently was actually how if we do these steps and if we do them exactly how we saw them done, or how we were taught them by somebody who perhaps learned them from their aunt or uncle or their grandparents, through actually doing that step, we're actually kind of we're representing that tradition, and we're almost kind of bringing to life that person or that tradition through that step. And even because I've even started going back to some of the steps I learned when I was 11 years old, and maybe I thought, oh no, these are too simple, or these are too straightforward, or I learned these ones when I was a kid, and I've realized the relevance of doing that, because you're bringing not only you're referencing and evoking a culture and a tradition and a place through that. And if you ever see in for instance in Cape Breton, when they have the square sets, I mean, this is a culture that we don't have necessarily in Scotland. It's a very different kind of context, but in the context of a square set, they'll have, someone will start a strathspey, which is the call to the dance, really, for the solo step dancers. So you've had all your square sets, and then you have the solo dancers getting up, and what you have is the whole hall, the whole community watching, and they're cheering on because they're doing whether they're doing a Willie Fraser step or whether they're doing a step they've made up themselves, and people are known for their individual steps, and people are cheering that on, and they want to see those steps. They don't necessarily want to, they want to know what they're going to get, and there's that kind of real feeling of being part of that community, and the kind of repertoire of steps is recognized within it. In Scotland, on the other hand, we don't have that as such, so it's a different kind of context altogether. Yeah. And yeah.
Sophie, man, I wish
I realized I was like talking far too much there.
No, we hadn't heard from you yet. Thank you. And we'll be able to hear much more from Sophie also tomorrow for the conversation with Sabre McGillivray too. I wish we could had another hour, because I'd love to dig into the Scottish relationships between flat-footing and the other Canadian forms of dance. I do want to get to the Baroque dance too.
It's okay for me just to touch on a couple of things that were said just as well, about the crooked tunes. Just I thought it was relevant.
Yes,
there was two things I went to pick up on. I can't remember. One was talk about the crooked tunes. It's quite interesting because in the Scottish tradition, there's a strong link right from the language, and the vocal dance music, the puirstibíal mouth music, to the music itself. And actually a lot of the old puirstibíal, they were crooked and they were irregular, and sometimes they might be following more the words and the rhythm of the words than following any such kind of straight. If you listen to even just old recordings just made in the last, maybe say in the 1950s, even then they were slightly crooked, or the rhythms were slightly kind of rhythmically complex or irregular. And also there's a strong tradition as well, the Oran Lui, the work song, which the connection between the vocal dance tunes and the work song, particularly with the walking songs. So these all kind of tie in. So it's interesting what especially in Quebec they were saying about the crooked tunes, because I think I don't think that's exclusive, and I think that also exists in Scottish tradition. But I think perhaps when the folklorists and the transcribers were going out in the 1800s and transcribing these tunes, they wanted them to fit into the 32 bars or whatever, and if it didn't, they would make it fit, or they would maybe dismiss that particular song or tune, and it wouldn't be transcribed. So yeah, I just thought that was worth mentioning from the kind of Gaelic perspective in Scotland.
Thanks for adding, Sophie. And I'm going to go on to Nic now, but I just want to make a note that Yvonne, I see you nodding your head, and Yvonne will be teaching a workshop right after this. Do you have anything quickly to add there?
Yeah, it just made me think that there's a lot of Scottish influence, but I think what happened was like one thing that I was just thinking about is that when you know, a lot of First Nations people got a hold of fiddles, right? Like nobody read music and they just started playing. And so I think, you know, there's like just a lot of like, you know, there's like that First Nations influence as well in our music, and you know, our people didn't, our Métis people didn't, you know, necessarily read music or, you know, and that sort of thing. So it was just everything was by ear that they played, but they just played it by ear. So, you know, tunes were passed on from generation to generation in families and things like that. So yeah, but it's very interesting to hear about all the cricket music out there, and you know, there is a lot of European influence. And so I'm like, oh yeah, okay, well, thank you for sharing, everybody, about all your cricket experience.
Thanks, Yvonne. Okay, let's before we bring Jane and Catherine in to finish it up, Nic, talking about lineage, you're somebody who has learned from a lot of folks with some deep lineages, and you've also, like many people here, have been very innovative. Could you speak to how you balance that innovation with still honoring your lineage?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with so many teachers and heroes and students and people whose work I've read and whose dancing I have admired, and people whose dancing I know I will admire as you continue to grow. I want to propose, perhaps controversially, that this juxtaposition between tradition and innovation, or like lineage and innovation, is actually like a false binary. That there are very strange and amazing outliers that are quite avant, that exist in traditional canon, but that maybe aren't at regarded at the center of those traditions. Certainly thinking about the band This Is How We Fly that I work with, my collaborators and I are interested in finding what my friend Queevy and O'Reilly calls the orphans of sound, who have been sort of dismissed or kicked out of the tradition, and bringing those back in, or making things with those. And I also think that that's in some ways related to what we were talking about earlier, this maybe binary of like bum diddy versus diddy bum, or like this idea of maybe like notation and meter. And I also want to propose that, you know, the body, meter, time are not universal ontologies, that those are really experienced differently in different places. One of my favorite authors, a translator named Paul Preciado, writes about this and talks about it. And I think we need to really think hard about the ways that any idea of imposing a sort of standardized notation system, that's always a colonial project. And I think we have a lot of work to do in terms of thinking about ways that we can decolonize our music and dance practices, thinking about music and dance practices that come from rural spaces or from marginalized communities. I think we have to also think about the power and the freightedness of words like square and straight, neither of which are terms that I resonate with me personally. This idea of crooked maybe feels like a really open place to explore along the sidelines of that big square dance that we're all a part of. That's the happy place for me. And I think in those corners, that's where I really like to create. And I think certainly during this pandemic, the project that's brought me sort of the most inspiration is working with Laurel Premo, who we get to have with us today. We've been working on some remote collaborations, and I'm really, really excited to be sharing conversations about time and timbre, temperament tuning, the way that meter can be stretched and pulled apart. That for me feels like quite a rich place to explore. And for me to find a way to move, and maybe even more importantly than moving, is seeking pleasure in this moment. So it's really great to be able to share all that with you all, and to be here, especially to have Laurel here as well with us. Thanks.
Thank you, Nic. And I have to say that I appreciate when I asked Nic if he would do these workshops, he said yes. And can we please make sure that we can, well, he said it in better words than this is my words, but how can we bring the artists in and or the musicians in, and make sure that, you know, in these days we aren't just using somebody else's music and there's no compensation. And I thank you, Nic, for the invitation to think about that. Sophie also brought an artist in for a video that she made that we will share at some point this weekend. And we wanted to make sure that the musicians are also being compensated. Pierre's son, Alexi, also participated in a video, Pierre and Anne-Marie's son, a great Quebecois fiddler. And you'll hear him featured at some point this weekend or on the mailing list for the Step Collective. All of these videos I'm referencing will go out to the mailing list this week. And so it was a really special thing to have Laurel be able to be featured in Nic's workshop and then as a recording, and then also show up and be live. So thank you, Laurel, for doing that. But Catherine and Jane are going to actually be sharing a wonderful presentation later this afternoon with two other dancers and researchers, Sarah Edgar and Marcia Deiter. And Marcia will be bringing in contra dancing from Haiti, Cuban Haitian contra dancing that's related to all of these genres. And Catherine is speaking to Baroque dance traditions, and Jane is speaking to the same contra dance traditions, similar, related contra dance traditions in Canada. And I think this is an interesting place to maybe, I guess this is where we will likely leave this conversation, that the Baroque dance tradition is something that is at the root of a lot of what we're talking about, especially in the Irish dancing master tradition. And Sophie and I had a little conversation about the soft shoe traditions we find more over in Europe than over here, and there being possibly a French influence because of that. But can Jane and Catherine, would you even just speak to Baroque dancing? And Anne-Marie, you're here as well. Anne-Marie is from France and also a great scholar in Baroque dance. So maybe the three of you, would you share a little bit about Baroque dancing and how it relates to what we're talking about?
I'd like to start a little bit, but just by saying that I've always enjoyed watching the videos of Pierre and Anne-Marie. And one of the things that I love about her performance is that her musicality has a depth to it that you don't see necessarily in other performances. And I think that the struggle for Baroque dance reconstructors has been, looking at, I don't know if you can see this, looking at the notation and fitting it to the music. But because it's notated, it misses a sort of a body kinesthetic sense about it. And I'm trying to encourage my dancers and my students to look more at traditional dance and make the tie between how the body dances in traditional dance and how it could dance in these passe-pieds and rigodons and even minuets from the court. One of the things that I think Pierre was talking about was the importance of the upbeat. So, for instance, in the minuet, if you're taking the minuet step and you're dancing it to a passe-pied, and if you think of the sixth beat as being not, equal value to all the other beats, but more, really as an upbeat that throws you into the next measure, it's so much easier physically to do the passe-pied at a quick tempo. So and I've had discussions with other reconstructors about how to handle the hemiola. And I keep saying, why don't you just go watch traditional dance and see how the dancers dance with the hemiola? And there's nothing in our texts from the 18th century saying that you just dance through the hemiola, for instance. So I'm hoping that more of my dancers and more of the people who are reconstructing these dance notations begin to look more deeply into traditional dance to understand the relationship of the dance to the music and to bring that musicality to their interpretations. I'll just end one last sentence, which is the dancing masters themselves talk about how they are bringing these rigodons from different parts of France or the bourrée from another part of France, and that they are traditional dances, but they've put them within the context and the conventions of the court. And Pierre, there are crooked tunes, crooked music. Absolutely, you were correct. And I want to underscore that, yes, it's very much in the Renaissance and in the Baroque. Okay, I've said it. Thank you.
Catherine. And Jane has an interesting DVD called How to Dance to Bach, and it's meant for classical musicians. Is that right, Jane?
Yeah.
Would you tell us about why you put that project together?
Well, just real quick, from working so much with musicians and trying to understand the dance, working with musicians in France. But actually, what I'd most like to talk about now, if you
Yeah,
will
go ahead. Yeah, go
not
ahead.
be offended, I actually wanted to talk about how, for me, I have sort of merged the French Baroque tradition and with Métis, not in my artistry as much, somewhat, but I came out of first a modern dance tradition, then the French Baroque tradition, and it was because of this that I got interested in discovering what were I know there were French in my homeland here in Minnesota. What were they dancing? And through this tradition and being able to also, understand the French text, but also French patois out here, is trying to figure out what happened to that. And immediately, of course, led me into Métis culture, Métis heritage, and the stories of just the stories of the Métis people that include Minnesota and include Wisconsin and include North Dakota. And the time I started, nobody had any idea, first of all, that was anything, what a Métis culture was. And second of all, was it here, and why was it here, and what would that be? So it was through the French angle of the 18th and century that I really got into what was going on here, which was Métis culture. The French culture in upper Midwest is Métis. I mean, there's no pure French culture here. It's all Métis, but very few people know about it. And so we've worked hard over the past 25 years to share this story, and discovered audiences that would come up and say, oh my gosh, I didn't know this, but I have ancestors with a French last name, and I know that I had a Native American great-great-grandmother, and so this must also be my story.
Grandmother.
And I think that's the case in the United States, that we don't have a Métis designation down here. We don't have Métis reservations down here. That story is blocked. And so that's been kind of part of my mission, is to share the French and Métis story down here in the States.
Thanks, Jane. And I see Yvonne had unmuted
Dance
herself.
and music as well.
I heard that in the U.S. they don't recognize Métis as a culture.
No.
And my dad is right here, and he's like, yeah, no, they don't. And I have ancestors down in Turtle Mountain, and there's a lot of Métis people that do live in the United States. There's a lot of when the Red River resistance happened, a lot of our people were dispersed and displaced, and so a lot of them went down into the States to escape all kinds of brutality. And so a lot of Métis, we call them Métis settlements. We don't really use the word reservations. A lot of Métis settlements were created, and like even Louis Riel was in Sun Valley, Montana, where he met and married his wife and lived, and her father was a buffalo hunter and all of that. So yeah, I don't know why. I'm curious. I don't know why they don't recognize Métis in the U.S. But that's what I've heard. So, yeah.
Yvonne, I'm so happy to hear your dad is there. Will you tell us a little bit? I know you've mentioned him a couple of times, and I'm so looking forward to meeting him someday.
Hey, Dad, want to say hi to everybody? Here's my dad. He could tell you so much about Métis history and culture. He's a master.
Hello, how are you, everybody? Comment ça va, tout le monde?
Yeah, he can speak Michif too.
We speak a dialect of French like that. That's what I grew up speaking. And so I can speak French kind of 3 different ways.
Ça va très bien, Monsieur Chartrand. Je suis content de vous parler.
Oui, c'est bon de vous rencontrer.
Ben oui, on est de la même famille.
père de mon grand-père, son nom c'était Pierre Chartrand.
Ah oui, comme moi. Ah ben, ça fait plaisir. Bonne fin de journée.
Vraiment.
Oui.
All right. What is Dad's name again?
Jules.
Jules. Jules, nice to meet you. I hope we get to meet you in person someday. I hear you have lots of great stories.
That'd be good. That'd be good.
Yeah. Well, we're at time, everybody. Man, my one regret is that we didn't get to hear from everybody more. And Anne-Marie, I hope that we get to hear from you more again in the future. I was hoping to get to your research on the Trois Rivières manuscripts. Anne-Marie has done some fascinating research on manuscripts found in Quebec. Is that right?
Yes, and thank you for your invitation. So I don't understand all, but because my English is not very good. Yes, I worked about the manuscript, the oldest manuscript in Canada, and that's French contredanse en carré, square dance with Baroque steps. So that's very interesting to to see that. And for me, it's not a tradition, but it's old dance, so it's ancient. It's not tradition because the repertoire is not doesn't exist now, so it's finished at about the beginning of 19th century, and but it's very interesting for me to my approach with traditional dance and ancient old dance. So not dance. Some people Baroque dancer with the classical dance and Baroque dance, but I think for me it's more interesting to see the traditional dancer, and I think the movement is more interesting to approach this the style. So how do they understand the music and the style of the movement like this? So I have a very good example.
And she's my Baroque teacher. I'm not a good. We just want to tell you that I'm starting a class in 30 minutes, so we will have to leave. So
Yeah.
thank you very much, Danielle, for all that. Huh?
Thank you, Pierre. And Yvonne starts a class in this room in 2 minutes. So we go in just
Okay.
really go in just a minute. I want to just thank everybody. I mean, this is what a phenomenal group of artists. And again, we could probably talk for 5 hours and still not have enough time. I apologize that we didn't really get to spotlight absolutely everybody for very long. Thank you all for being here. Each of you are such inspirations to me, and I know to many people in this room with us right now. And if you'd like to go over to stepcollective.com and join the mailing list, my goal will be to help compile some info about all these artists and make sure that you have access to the work that they're doing as well in one spot, if that feels better or easier for you.